You are listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, episode number 215. Today I speak with husband and former military service member, advocate to reduce veteran suicide rate and for those suffering with PTSD, Kevin Macomber, on finding hope and healing from trauma and PTSD. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their touching stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today we will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hello and welcome back to Faith Breathed Hope. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today I am here with Kevin Macomber. Hey, Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
I am excited to have you here to share your story and to actually tell us about your book. But before we do that, I always ask my guests if they would share a little something about themselves that maybe not everybody in their circle knows.
Probably the most notable thing was I was an engineer and inventor and had a couple really notable inventions, but probably the most important one was I designed the power distribution equipment running the high-speed computers at the New York Stock Exchange. And it was a fascinating invention because it only included one wire. And despite all the electrical engineers before me, they never thought of configuring one wire in a certain way. And that was the invention, and it had this absolutely extraordinary impact.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Today, we are here to talk about your journey with PTSD and
Mm.
the book that you have written. When we were talking earlier, you talked about a chapter called Drifting. So I do want to get into that. But before we do that, would you like to share a little bit about yourself and your story with the audience?
For sure. The long story short is I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. Both my mom and dad were both equally dysfunctional, but in different ways. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he brought home an incredible amount of anger from his service. I didn't really understand it at the time because he was old when he had me. And I didn't understand he was probably traumatized, and he brought that into the family. And then my mom had her own issues, and it led for a very chaotic childhood. And so at a very young age, I found myself trying to find ways to stay out of the house between friends. I went to church youth group. I was involved in various arts like drama and music. And so that sort of held me over probably 80, 90% of the time until I started looking to go in the Marines at the age of 16 years old. And I ended up in the Navy 2 months after 17. I just wanted to move on, get out of the house. And I had my mom sign me into the Navy. And so I was very young when I went in. And I did actually fairly well, but I also found myself less than 2 years later being shipped off to the Middle East. And I was part of the broader Marine Expeditionary Forces that were over in Beirut. And it was brutal. That's the only way to put words to what I went through. So, my thoughts having left a, very trauma-filled, anger-filled childhood, I'd go into something that allowed me to escape. It just added more layers onto it. I subsequently was in an accident, and, you know, I didn't get proper help there. It was a TBI-related accident. At the time, they didn't have doctors, and, also at that time, they didn't look at injuries like they do today. It was basically, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." And it's like, "Okay, get back to work." And that's how it was back in the day, back in the '80s. And then I did my 6 years. I knew at that point that I was already suffering trauma from my military service. It was really hard. I remember, just the depth and the breadth of being scared, and if you could imagine, everybody's scared every once in a while, but to be able to sustain it for, 24 hours a day for months on end, it does take a toll on you. It was always risk. We were always heightened. Anyhow, I did my service, and after my service, I went to college. I did extremely well in college. I was disciplined, but also probably it was my trauma driving it. I kept myself busy between working part-time jobs, going to school, and I kept myself overly busy so I wasn't dealing with the impacts and the damage that had been done by my trauma. And, I got into my late 20s, and what happened? I went through yet another trauma, yet this time it was different. This time, there were no reserves. There was no resilience. Everything was gone, and I mentally crashed, and within a very short period of time, I had a mental breakdown, and later within that year, I attempted suicide for my first time. So, I went from being perceived as being, an everyday guy living a normal life. I really wasn't. I was sick, and I was sort of ignoring it, and it caught up with me.
There's a lot to unpack and all of that, and I thank you for sharing. So I
Mm,
want to go back to you talked about the trauma from your childhood and the
mm,
chaos, and you in order to go forward, you put yourself in the military thinking that was going to kind of clear up all of these
right,
things. You could get your life in order and
right.
move forward and leave that, I'm guessing, leave the other stuff behind. Um, at this point, you said, were you a Christian at this point?
I wasn't. As a kid, like most families in the '60s and '70s, we went to church, but you went to church to be seen. It was more of a cultural thing, and, people were there, and, of course, my dad put on a great show, but, he was not what you would call a Christian man. But I would say, though, it did plant some seeds, though. I did have some positive experiences. There were some good people at the church. Met some friends there that to this day are still friends, and also church youth group. So I was aware of it, but I actually did not become what I would call a Christian until after I attempted suicide.
Okay. So you were hoping that maybe you could do this yourself. I think a lot of people have this idea of, oh, my life is falling apart, or I should be able to handle these things. People perceive me
Mhm.
as this or that, and I have to be the part that I look. And so there's this, I have to do this myself mentality.
Right.
You said that not until you attempted suicide did you become a Christian. Was there some kind of epiphany that happened? I mean, did somebody
There
come into
was,
your life?
and, for sure, and this is sort of how God works. I was at work, and everybody knew I was ill. Despite having a mental breakdown, I still managed to get to work, though I don't remember any of it. I don't remember doing my job. Somehow I did. Maybe standards were low and I did well enough to pass, but, I was zoned out much of the day. And a guy at work handed me a newspaper, and he said, "I want you to see something," and had an article in it for a recovery group, a support recovery group that he found. And I'm like, "What am I gonna do with this?" Church was the last thing from my mind, and, you know, I it wasn't for me until I said, "Well," over a period of time, weeks, maybe a couple months, I went. And I went to this church. I don't remember it so much. I mean, we're talking now, this is about 35 years ago. And all of a sudden, I was surrounded by people who actually cared about me. And I'd never felt anything like that before. I'd never seen anything. He said, "Okay, I'll give this a chance." So when I became a Christian, I didn't have that epiphany like some people do. Mine was very it revealed itself in plateaus. I'd get a little bit more, I'd go up. I'd get a little bit more, I'd go up. And then there were a number of events that occurred, that were just near miraculous. It's the kind of thing that God does when he puts 2 people together and you go, "This just didn't happen. God had this plan the whole times." And, the best story I like to tell, I started getting involved doing missionary volunteer work at the church, and they sent us to a VA hospital. And we went there to cheer up the elderly patients in a nursing home, and I got matched up with this, 96-year-old woman by the name of Susie. And as things always happen was the tables turned, and she started talking to me. She sensed something was wrong, and I told her what had happened and how sick I had been and all that. And the woman said, "Kevin, you are a young man. Your whole life is still ahead of you." Now, when I left there, we had a longer conversation, but those were the words that stood, and those words are in my book. And I went to the nurse's station. I said, I was really touched by this woman. And they said, "Oh, yeah, she's an amazing woman. She was a World War One nurse in Europe." So she had seen me before, but 80 years prior, she knew what shell shock and what PTSD was. And that was the first experience that you go, "Oh my God meant for this to happen." And I
Mhm.
had events like that over and over. And when you talk to Christians who go through that sort of transformative, those phases really, and they have these experiences, and you go, "Oh my gosh, God lined all this up. It just didn't happen. God did this." And that there, I tell this story over and over, and woman had seen me 80 years prior,
Mm.
and maybe God had done the same. He had prepared her for 80 years to wait for me to come in and to talk to her. So here she is leaving her life, helping me to continue on with my life.
Isn't that that gives me chills even thinking about it. That is such an amazing thing that God plants. He plants his own seeds. He plants these people in our lives. He plants these events, all the things that, we so many people do not know their purpose. You hear that all the time. "I don't know my purpose. What am I here for? What was I made for? What is my purpose?" And that's a really difficult thing to share with people because God has made us all for a reason. We hear that all the time, right? But
Right,
at the same
absolutely.
time, we're here to serve. And so he had all these events happen in her life so that she was able to serve you in your life with all those years in between. That's so amazing. And so,
Well, and subsequently now add another 30 years to, I'm 30 plus years in my healing. I
Mhm,
did some great things in my life, professionally, socially, um, other aspects. And it wouldn't be until I wrote this book about a year ago, and it really gave me time to reflect that all that work, all those experiences I was learning was not for that moment, but
mhm,
it was to help me get this book written and get this book out because the response to the book, has been extraordinary. Technically, I'm a nobody in the sense of writing, and people don't understand the book market. I was warned about this, but there are about 11,000 books uploaded every day,
mm,
and the ocean of information, even podcasts, all the podcasts that are out there. And then for you to be a nobody and say, "Well, I'm going to get this message. I think God wants me to do this." And God did want me to write this book. I prayed about it. And then the book took off. And you go, "Oh, wow, all those years of working in the corporate life and volunteerism and being involved in church and all that really was just to prepare me up to this point so I would be capable to really do it." And now when I talk to people, I say, I think I'm doing the best work of my life right now. I'm 62 years old, and, you would think, "Oh, it's time to retire," but, you know, I left the job of the world, and now I'm doing God's work. This is
mhm,
100% God's work. I mean, when I look at this book, having my wife has been influential in this too, and knowing that she says, just change your strategy. And she said, never forget this. This was early this year. She said, Kevin, if you help one person, your book is a success.
Mhm.
And I really took that to heart, and then we started getting the responses back, those rare you don't get a lot of them, you got quite a few, but you don't get a lot of them, where people say, "I can't tell you how much your book has helped me."
Mhm.
And I probably get one of those about every week, every other week now. Just it's a subtle message, and that that fills me with joy. But we also chose to do this essentially for free. So the book. I said, God doesn't need. I don't need any more money. I don't need any reputation. I don't have an ego on this. Just want to go out there and I just do what I think God wants me to do. And little by slow, I'd get on interviews and podcasts and articles. The book has now been accepted by all four major military academies, not only in hard copy, but I gave them free digital use. So every single cadet in all four academies could have the book for free. And then it was accepted by the Royal Military College in Canada, which is the Royal Army and the Royal Navy. Same thing. Penn State is the first of multiple colleges to use it in their Veterans Integration Program. And it just goes on. I've been engaged by the governor's office, the DMVA. I'm going to Washington, D.C. here in a couple of weeks to speak. All of it's been for
Cool.
free. All of it. And that's one of the things. It's like, I've been asked, do you charge to speak? I said, absolutely not. I don't want any money for this. And you look at that, that is probably the most fulfilling work and my best work I've ever done in my life.
Right.
But I had to go through the trauma. I had to go through working all those years just to get to this point. And I think this is where God wanted me the whole time.
For sure. I believe it too. And, like go back to that place where I was talking about the purpose. And some people are able to know um, somewhat what their purpose is when they're younger. Some people come into it from rites of
Mm,
passage, from maturity, which is what I think you're talking about here. I know kids who have unfortunately passed away. And, because when I started the show, I told you that I lost my daughter and I met
mhm.
um, so many people across the entire world that had been going through loss. And some of the women that I met had talked about their children who died at like 12. And so they, from that passing,
Mm.
their moms were able to start a ministry of their own, which is the legacy of that child. So that purpose started really early. So, I know everybody is dying to know. I don't think we named the book. So would you like to tell everybody the title so they know what book
Sure.
is where everywhere?
Book has got a short title and a long title, but it's Walking from the Shadows: My
Hmm.
Journey with Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder.
Yes. Yes. So I am excited because this is something that is so needed for so many people. And I wanted to ask you, how do you
Mm,
feel when we talk about the word post traumatic stress? A lot of times, and I think maybe even in our prior conversation, we talked about this a little bit, but a lot of the times you think about just the military and combat and things like that.
right.
What other ways does this manifest? You had talked about growing up in childhood. Can you talk to that a little bit?
I wrote the book almost 1.5 times. So what happened was, as I was writing chapters, I had, female friends from high school and one other woman who was a neighbor. And I said, I was close enough to them. They were emotionally mature people. I said, "I need you to put a set of eyes on this book for me." And then they came back, and then they told me that what their lives were really like, not what I thought they were like.
Right.
And I said, "Oh my." And some had gone through sexual assault, both as children, adults, been violated in other ways. Um, and I unfortunately hear this a lot, is infidelity, because that can do a lot of damage to people. And Again, I prayed about it. I said, I've got an opportunity to have a broader story here, and I pulled out all the military from it. There was a lot of military in my book, and now there's very little. I do enough to, sort of cement a couple of the pieces because I have so many military friends and people who read the book. But it's generally neutral, and that's where I coined the expression "trauma is trauma." And, trauma is really, as I've come to understand it, it can be from the most simple, from grief all the way up to where I was. So your listeners can understand, the VA looks at trauma as 5 tiers at 10, 30, 50, 70, and 100. And that's how they pay you out based on the injury they feel you sustained in your service. And I'm at 70%, and what that means is that my PTSD is severe and that my symptoms are near constant. So I have the symptoms all the time, and then 100%, the only level above me is incapacitated from it. Though, I attribute my faith to, keeping really helping me, process and manage it. But I would come that, there'd be different intensities, different types. And, I tell the one story. I met a man, oh my goodness, I've got the time off, over 10 years ago. And he was on one of those landing boats on D-Day. He was the sailor driving the boat in, and he told me just of this horrific accident that happened to one of the Army guys. He saved his life. But when he talked to me, he was so calm and matter of fact about it. I'm like, I would have been out of my mind had I seen what he saw, but he wasn't. And then I've seen people go through basic grief, what I put on the lower tier, grief, and just absolutely be, overwhelmed by it. So there are no rules to it, and it's broad. And I think it's important to understand how much what the intensity is and the symptoms of it, so what kind of actions you can take to minimize it, to heal from it, minimize it, and move on with your life. Because if you don't manage it, it will manage you.
Right. Well, so when symptoms rise, what are some things that we can do to find peace, joy? You mentioned your faith. You mentioned the Lord. I'm sure that has a lot to do with how you calm yourself and find that peace and joy. Can you talk to that a little bit?
I can talk to that. So first of all, particularly if you've been through severe trauma, I'm talking the high end like me, your brain does get rewired. They're doing a lot of brain studies now that your brain is in a sense is damaged. It rewires itself, and it can trick you. And one of the earlier things I learned with my faith, was to pray and to slow down and learn how to talk to God, and more importantly, try to listen to God. And I would, come to understand that some of the things you think aren't necessarily real. And that took some time to really overcome. You get angry as an example, and come to a conclusion too quick. Well, when you have PTSD, you do that all the time. But what your faith helps you do is, I think the most important thing I learned as an early skill, what do I have control over and what don't I have control over? And that probably early on, learning that I have very little control over most things and learning how to turn that control over to God, all of a sudden I started getting control of my life. And it's sort of that conundrum, okay, I'm going to give it away so I get control. And
Right.
that was one of the things they like to use in the profession, the psychology profession, the term grounding techniques.
Mhm.
And I'm not a big fan of it because it's generalized, but meditation and praying are part of that. When meditation, I'm meaning just positive thinking, quietly thinking, and then praying is all part of grounding techniques. And I would come because when you've got PTSD, you tend to be reactionary. You have to train yourself not to be reactionary. And that requires you to learn how to find and implement peace in your life. Learn to be at ease. Don't always react. Slow down. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What should I be doing? What does God want me to do? What's the right thing to do here? And, it's awkward. I tell you, it can be very awkward at first doing that. But with time, practice, and patience, you learn these new behaviors, new habits. And I would tell you, despite what I went through, incredible trauma I went through as a young, for 20 years from, being a little kid up in my late 20s, you know, I guess I could say I would have the right to be angry, frustrated, you know, some people want revenge and, or they, retaliate. I don't want any of that. I'm at such peace with my life despite what I went through. And I like to, I think that resonates when you're with me. You could see I'm at peace. I'm just so relaxed and I'm so rational and practical. But that just didn't happen, right? I had to learn how to do it. The Bible's incredible. Particularly, there's a lot of advice. If you can't find in the Bible, just go to Google and say, "Give me a chapter. What should I be doing here?" And it'll help you find that, right? Um, but there's wisdom what to do there in any situation you're facing when you're facing just these overwhelming symptoms that are just, absolutely engulfing you. And by the way, when I was at my worst, I had all the textbook symptoms you see in the movies with military people, all of them to the nth degree.
Mm, I'm sorry about that. I think a lot of people silently struggle too. And they're afraid to share what they're going through with people. They may be afraid of judgment. They may be um, afraid to be a burden. I've heard that one before. And they don't want to bother people because they know other people have their own things going on, or they might just think that people don't care because, or they won't even understand. Maybe they think that other
Mhm,
people's
mhm,
lives are so perfect that there's no way they could possibly understand. And it's so important to learn how to what we used to call it was coping, find coping
mhm,
skills, this quiet time that you're talking about, being able to, you mentioned, understand and find the truth. And that, at least that's what I heard when you were talking, is being able to say, hey, all the things that are going on in my head, is it true? And if it's not true, what purpose does it have to be there? If it is true, then how can I affirm that? What do I need to do if it needs to be changed? How can I seek God in those situations? And you mentioned scripture, which is a book of instruction and promise. So it is a guidebook
mhm,
of life. And so many people, though, they just don't know how to share their story. And so I really applaud you for being able to come forward and share. And I know you've shared on other podcasts and, like you said, in the book, and probably in classrooms. And you said you're getting ready to go to Washington. That's really cool. Um, so I do you have any scripture that really is helped you in particular to just sit and be calm, or um, move away from that anxiety or the fear that you mentioned in those times of great stress?
I think what helped me the most when I was in my dark place, so you gotta understand, I'm on the other side now, and I'm trying to help people who are in that dark place. That's really what the end game is with my book, to lead people there. And absolutely the Psalms. The Psalms spoke to me the most because in context, and this is very important, and it could be the case now. So there's so many avenues we could take this, but 30 plus years ago, we had no resources. There
Mm,
was nobody to talk to. They didn't really understand PTSD then. I don't know if they still do yet, not in the way I think they should.
right.
Um, and we didn't know where to go, who to ask, what to ask. And there was a lot of craziness. And one of the problems is when you have PTSD, you're not just angry, or you're not just sad, or you're not just scared, and you got all these things. You may have several symptoms like I did, and they're all going on at the same time. but they change in intensity, going up and down by the day, sometimes even by the hour. So those varying combinations creates this different type of, I like to use the word cocktail, a drink, and it's all moving. You're going, what am I feeling now? It was so hard to wrap. But I also, back then, people were sort of cruel, in the sense, particularly if you're a veteran, you couldn't speak out about it because it was viewed as a sign of weakness.
Mhm.
If you had a mental health issue, you were viewed as a lesser human being. Um, and, the world was sort of cruel about it 30 years ago. And so I went to the Psalms. I'm saying, what is going on here? I feel like the dogs are attacking me. I'm being attacked. I'm just trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to find wholeness. And that was in that point when I started finding my faith. And I remember I would read the Psalms while I'd walk for miles, just walking. What? Show me something, show me something. And it would be eventually walking, by the way, that would begin to pull me out of my ugliness. Because literally at that point I was physically and mentally numb. I could literally remember pushing on my face and not feeling my face. I was so numb. But then I started to get some of my senses back during the walking. I could smell a little bit of the ground, the dirt, the forest. I could hear the birds. I could feel the warmth of the sun on my skin. Small things like that, and that began transforming me. And I realized, it's a journey, and that's actually where the title of the book came from, Walking from the Shadows. Because I remember the day I was walking underneath trees, and I walked into the sunlight, and I felt the warmth of the sun, and I hadn't
Oh, I
felt it
love
in
it.
3 years.
That's beautiful imagery. I love it. Um, so, a lot of times we, like I said, we downplay our own symptoms. I've heard military members
Mhm.
mention something to the effect of, well, they wouldn't have PTSD or they wouldn't be affected by that because they were not in combat, and that hurts my heart to hear things like that because it's, in other words, it's like saying, well, the things that I'm going through are nothing compared to the things that you are going through.
Right,
Even as a grieving mother, I have had um, other people who have grieved would say, "Oh, well, we would be talking about something they went through, their loss," and I'm like, "But I didn't lose a child, so I can't imagine." And I'm like, "No, we're not comparing because your
right.
loss is important." And there's a tendency for people to downplay their own loss because I'm not sure if it's like an insecurity and not feeling like they're worthy enough to feel their emotions even.
And that's why I stripped out the military, because I think military trauma is elevated higher. I don't think my trauma is any worse than anybody else, and I never wanted to be in that position. And, as I said, talking to these women and some of the things they went through, I went, "Oh my." And I said, "Mine was bad, but I don't think it was that bad." And I saw the value in just talking to one
Mhm.
another, being supportive,
Yeah.
loving people to one another, and acknowledging that. I do hear that from the veterans, but again, part of that's been said. I blame the military on that. The transition plan away from the military, it's far more, the transition is more than just combat to civilian life. It's a different rigidity, a different lifestyle, it's different expectations, and they don't prepare you out of them to leave the military. If you decide to do your tour and finish, they basically say goodbye and you're on your way. And I think, it does cause a lot of people that. And I think, they're so busy on getting people into the military and maintaining who they have. They don't have the bandwidth to take care of the people leaving the military. And then all these people are left to their own. And then you also have people beside that, some people are just emotionally immature.
Mhm.
I was emotionally immature as a young person, but I learned, and I married well. I met it was interesting, that same church, by the way, all these incredible opportunities happened to me. It's actually where I met my current wife, was at that church. And the
Oh.
minister, we were going to Sunday school. So the church I went to, we had Sunday school before the church. Brilliant idea. So you can understand what the pastor was generally saying. So you wouldn't be in the pew going, what's he talking about? You sort of get a primer, and it was brilliant. But anyhow, the pastor introduced me to Lisa Ari, my wife. He said, "Will you take her to Sunday school?" I said, I remember saying, "Thank you, God." And we're married here 30 years later.
That's
And that
awesome.
was a big part of it too, because part of your healing is being balanced with your partner, right? You want to be equally yoked,
Hmm.
and the value of that. And my wife was crucial in my healing. If there's guys here listening to this, take my advice, what I'm going to say here. If your wife is doing it in a loving and kind way and trying to help you with your emotions and what's going on, be humble. Be humble and listen to her. My wife actually taught me so much about feelings, emotions, and she's a God-fearing woman, so, she always did it in the right kind of way, as sort of a good Christian wife would, nudging you along, booting you in the tail side a little bit, get moving, you got this," and no, you can't do that. Try it this way. And my wife was really a huge part of my healing by teaching me how to feel, how to express my emotions, how to express myself. Um, Incredibly strong marriage. I mean, we're very, very, very close, and all the things that have happened that God has put between us. As I mentioned earlier, we have two boys of our own, but we fostered four other kids, and they just showed up, basically showed up. And I said, okay, I guess you want me to take care of them. And it's still happening now. I still mentor a number of young people to this day, because I think they recognize most people around me know what I went through in my military service. And so they feel comfortable coming to me and say, hey, what would you do? This is what happened. And I said, that's a great place to be in. Great transformation from being back in the dark period and then finding Jesus, and then embracing Jesus, and then practicing and looking back 30 years. That's what makes my book so interesting, because when I started, the book was created from journaling for 15 years. So when I was suicidal, I was writing all that down. I wrote on and off for 15 years, and I'd write on the back of church bulletins, on the sides, on everything. When we came to Pennsylvania, I had over a box of a banker's box of
Hmm.
notes, and that's what created my book. And I
Right.
just broke them down into chapters. But that whole 30 years, what that whole experience was like, not knowing Jesus, meeting Jesus, growing with Jesus, now working, doing his work, has really been really a fascinating journey.
Yeah. You, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much, probably on behalf of all married women, for speaking such high things of your wife. That is a very admirable trait to hear a man talk about his wife that way. So I know that the women listening can appreciate that. I want to go back a little bit to you were talking about keeping busy earlier on in the show, where you did a lot of things to get through to keep busy. Yeah, we've talked about that some on the show where you just throw yourself into something. I know for a fact that I was like that after Isabella passed away. I started brand new things, like several brand new things. I've always been a high achiever and doing multiple
Mhm,
things,
mhm,
but so I thought it was just a personality thing. But then several years after that, a friend said something to me who she also had a significant loss. And she said, you and I stay busy. And I think that's the grief, basically. It's like this subconscious, um just this pull to just do things, I guess, so that you didn't have to deal with. And I thought I dealt with all of mine, you know. Only I became a grief coach, I wrote the book, I have the show, and at the
mhm.
same time I still stayed busy. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, you know what, she's probably right, because the more that you do, the less you have to think, and it's hard to be in that
Absolutely.
space of thinking.
I think it comes from sort of that cultural, lesson we all hear, "Suck it up and move
Yes.
on."
Yes.
And there is some truth to that, but there is also very common among people who have PTSD, severe PTSD, is they keep themselves so busy because if you are very busy, you don't have time to think about anything else,
Mhm.
and it's avoidance and it's denial. And that was my problem. I went through college. Now, granted, I went to the military to go to college. I took college so seriously because I put myself through it and I worked 2 part-time jobs. But I think that became a crutch and, I got out of it and I just stayed busy, busy, busy. And I had never, as I said, I never dealt with that, with all the issues that were underlying it. So, the outward Kevin looked very normal and very successful. The inward Kevin was destroyed. I
Mhm.
was literally I was destroyed. I was probably destroyed in college, much more than I realized. It's sort of hard to go back because, again, there were no reference points. So, like today, if you have a question on something, you could go to AI or go to Google. There's all kinds of books. There was nothing. So, you just sort of go, "Okay, what do I do? Okay, I'll just stay busy and, it will pass." Well, it doesn't pass. It just doesn't. And, I think when I got into my faith, there was so much good advice in there, and the wisdom is such is it gives you not only forward thinking, but reverse thinking. And I think we always go, the Bible's only forward thinking, do this, and you go that direction. But the Bible is a lot of reflecting in the past. And it's good because it could say, you know, did you make a mistake? Did you do something wrong? And I did do things wrong. And I've gone back to people years later and said, I think I did something, I'm sorry that I did that, or, I did the wrong thing. Most of the people didn't even remember what I was talking about, but it was embedded in me that I wasn't the best
Right.
person I could have been. And, that's what it is. It's a self-help book on continually improving yourself to make yourself a better person. In my case, I wanted to be a better man. And as a Christian man, there's a number of things you have to do to make yourself a better man. And you have to separate a lot of those things that the world values and go, okay, they are nice, but they aren't the essential things that make you the person who you are, who you want to be, the legacy. And I really started looking at it. How did I want my kids to know? My kids have no idea. I think my one engineering son understands a little bit about the invention I did because I helped them all through college. I was sort of fun, honestly, having a son going to engineering school and talking. The rest, they couldn't care less. I don't even think they know the company name that I worked for 14 years. I bet you
Wow.
not one of them could mention the company that I worked for 14 years where I was going every day for, overnight and traveling all the time, and then you realize, well, what's important here? None of that. None of it.
Mhm.
None of it. And so, it's constantly improving upon yourself. And, going back to my wife, it is, and again, for the guys, it's a team effort. It's a team effort to listening to each other, exalting each other. It's so interesting. People see we get my wife and I get compliments because we're kind to each other in public in the right kind of way. We're not showing off.
Right.
I'm talking like we dote on one another, gentle, subtle things. And people notice that. Well, that's a good thing because, one, I mean it, of course, but two, we influence other people. People are always watching us, how we
Mhm.
act, how we present ourselves, how we project, how we wanna be viewed. And, my journey, of course, having come through just utterly through the gates of hell, um, is really a testimony. If you let faith into your life and you start embracing it and you learn, it changes your life. I think you could see from here. I don't know if you had a chance to read much of the book yet, but once it may be good after the fact going, "Oh, wow, I remember him saying this and doing that," and, it's a choice. God gives us free will, you know,
Right.
and what you do with it is your decision, but I know what I'm doing with mine, and I try the best to do that.
Well, as a mom, I think about that. We are in these situations daily, it feels like, where I have the opportunity to um react. You said there was, reactionary things
Of
and
course.
or and or I say and or because sometimes I do react and then reflect over that and say, okay, and it's an opportunity to go back and tell my kids, hey, this was not okay. And this is how I should have done it. And this is how I like for you to learn from this. And so I see that God puts us in those places where we constantly have this choice to, you know, not only and move forward and grow from it, but also, like you
Mhm,
said, influence others because people are watching. But at the same time, you say, "Oh my goodness, people are watching. I have to look perfect." No, you have to be honest and seek God to be able to serve others. Like I said, your purpose to serve others, to be able to say, "Hey, I'm honest. This is my mistake. I'm honest. This is what I'm going
mhm.
through. I could probably relate to you. You could probably relate to me if we're all honest. This is how I go through it. Doesn't have to be how you go through it. What can we do to grow from all of this and to serve the kingdom?"
I wanna add something there. You're a young mom with relatively young kids still, and so my youngest now is 24, and it is so interesting to listen to the kids now and reflect upon how we were parents, and they say, now they say, "We really appreciate how you handled things when we were younger," and you're like going, "Yes, we listened, something worked, something worked," and they do listen, and, my relationship with my kids, particularly my youngest son, is he's been more interesting with finding his faith because he's an engineer, and like me, engineers look at their faith very differently. They're very compatible. So when you're an engineer, you understand all this stuff and the complexity of all the equations and math and all that. And all of a sudden you realize this just didn't happen, right? It's
Mhm.
impossible. It is impossible when you look at all the equations of how everything in the world works. It just didn't happen. There wasn't a big explosion. It's all planned. And, it's been particularly interesting to sit back and talk to him and see and watch his faith evolve because he had a great childhood, because we were good parents. And to see him be so appreciative, particularly when he knows what I went through. What I do view is my son says, "You're a good guy. You're a good dad." And that's pretty powerful,
Mhm.
and you see that relationship like the Father has with us, right? God to Jesus.
Mhm.
And then you see that relationship, God to you, well, you sort of have that same responsibility, you pass it down. And then
Mhm.
you see that with your kids. You see that power that you're being given. You're being trained to train. You're basically training the trainer,
Right.
and, you're creating good human beings. When you look at it, the older you get, you just want your kids to be good people, productive citizens, God-fearing,
Mhm.
just good people, good husbands, good dads. That's if they do more, fantastic, but that's really ultimately what you're doing. And when we act that way and when we correct ourselves and we show humility and, that it goes farther than
Mm.
most anything you can do as a parent because they see you're just a bigger one of them.
Right. Well, and we have to stop when we get caught up in all the things. It's really easy to get
Mhm.
caught up in, if you're competitive or in any way, whether it would be academics or job related or sports or whatever. And then you say, okay, in the comparison with other people and say, okay, I am just trying to do my best and serve the Lord and do the things that He wants us to do. And there's a lot of peace in that if you can embrace it. Um, and then I was gonna mention, you said something about being grateful about, Well, it made me think about creation. So we study a lot of that about how my middle son is studying geography, and not just about where all the continents are, or the lakes, or
Mhm.
and things like that, but about how God is in all of it. And we were in the car driving to one of the places that we always drive the other day, and my oldest, who is in high school, we were in the car, and I looked at the sky, and we always look at things. He's a writer, so we always do imagery type things, and so we'll look at the wind in the trees, and we'll talk about, the trees dancing, things like that. But we
Mhm.
looked at the sky, and for whatever reason, God has me notice the sky all the time, the clouds, the sunsets, the sunrises, just
Mhm.
whatever reason, it's just amazing to me. And I told my son, I said, "That is so beautiful. It looks like a painting." And he said, "No, the painting looks like it." So the creator had the sky first. It's like the chicken or the egg, right? So the sky came first, the painting came afterwards. And it's just this awe and appreciation of what God has given. And even a conversation I had yesterday with somebody about all the things that we're going through, whether they're PTSD or just general everyday frustrations, anxiety,
Mhm.
fear,
Mhm.
because we all have them, whether we want to let the world know or not. We were looking at the verse that talks about, if God what is it, clothes the birds and the flowers in the field that's, here today and gone tomorrow, how much more does he care for us? And I'm sure I butchered that. I'm not very good at speaking
Either
verbatim.
well, you're talking to a guy whose brain is messed up. One of the things I really learned that really helped me have a better positive mental attitude, and that is life can really be terrible. It can be unfair, it can be cruel. Good people can do bad things to you, bad people do bad things to you. But one of the things your faith teaches you is be grateful for everything.
Mhm.
Everything. Just don't be grateful for the good things, but be grateful for the bad things. And I, just like everybody else, there's bad things, but then again, I say, "Okay, God, why did this happen? What do you want me to see here?"
Mhm.
And learning how to reframe your thoughts and your experiences. Yeah, everybody's going through this garbage. It is chaos. But what are you trying to get me? And I tell you more often than not, not long after, I'll come to my senses, say, something else. Well, it was just meant to be, and so just deal with it and move on. But many times, the one door does close and the other door opens up. But it's learning how to reframe your attitude. I think that's probably the most powerful skill I learned to do. You can choose to be negative, and it's so easy to be negative. You can
Yeah.
also choose to be positive. When I get up in the morning, I do positive affirmations.
Mhm.
One of the things I do every morning, I've done this for probably 20, almost 30 years. And I learned because my father-in-law, my wife's dad, died at a very young age of a heart attack. And I never forget my wife's mom saying how much it meant to her when he would say, "I love you."
Mhm.
And I took that to every morning when I get up, I thank God for another day, and I tell my wife I love her, and I do the same when I go to bed. So I
Yeah.
begin the day on a positive, I end the day on positive, but in the morning, what am I really grateful for? I mean, me, I've been to the gates 3 times already, okay? 3 times, right up to the outside of those gates, 3 times. I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful for everything I have, a home, a great wife. I've got food today, I got my faith, I got friends, learn whatever it may be. Learn to be positive for everything and focus on that and make that the priority. Make it proportionally bigger, that's more important. Those positive things are far more bigger than those annoying inconveniences, problems, chaos, whatever, and just let it go, and just turn it over to God. Turn
Yes.
all the and it was an amazing thing when I remember young learning about turning things over to God. I just kept giving him everything. "Here, take this, take this, take this." And, he just kept taking it, and,
Yeah.
it worked out. I
It's
thought
like
he'd
a
get
new
tired of me, 'cause I was really sort of taking advantage of him there. When I figured out he would take it and he'd take everything, okay, I gave him everything,
one.
and wow, did that you can see it really changed my life.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. You lay it all down at his feet, and then what's amazing is that he does care for us so much that he will take it all. And you don't have to be worried about what he's going to think because he knows
Mm-mm,
your heart anyways. I feel like, why are we worried about how we talk to him? I've heard so many people say, oh, you have to pray this way or you have to pray that way.
mm-mm.
You just can't sometimes, and that's why it says that the Holy Spirit is there to intercede for us. But sometimes it's like you're so heavy that you don't have the capability to formulate the correct words. It's just like blah. And God knows. I mean, he knows whether or not you use fancy words or whether or not
Doesn't
you just
matter.
kind of say it. Or if it's
You know,
any.
I know the Bible pretty well, but I'm lousy at scripture. I can't because of my brain, but I get the big picture and I live it and he knows it. I'm good. And, you just it's not that hard. I think again, a lot of this comes what you're talking there, how to pray. It's again, that's another form of control. You're just
Mm,
not letting yourself loose. Just it doesn't matter how you pray. Just pray, you
right.
know? Doesn't matter, just it I think people try to make things too difficult, and
Yes.
if you keep it simple. One of the things I learned as an engineer, so important in my Christian faith and how I want to embrace it and practice it. But as an engineer, you learn the best processes are those ones that are repeatable and sustainable. And those 2 words, repeatable and sustainable. Well, whatever you do it the best you can, but just keep doing it and keep doing it.
Right.
And keep it simple, though.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of things we try to complicate. Kevin, do you have any additional encouragement? I don't like to use the word advice, but encouragement for those out there listening that say, maybe maybe they don't know if they, have PTSD. They haven't been diagnosed officially, but they're either feeling a lot of heaviness and stress. And you have any encouragement for those people?
I do, and I think first of all is to understand there's a range from where you go from the lower end of PTSD is grief, and then you go all the way up to the severe end I am, I guess. And my words of encouragement are to journal. And I don't mean journal, it doesn't have to be like a diary or it doesn't have to be, perfect writing. I always get that. It can be anything. So I still journal now, but sometimes it's goals, it's dreams, it's thoughts. But if
Mm,
you're at the early part of your journey, if you're dark, start writing it down and, date it, underline a couple keywords, but don't stop doing it. And then you can come back to it later, review it again. And if you're not sure if you are or you aren't, well, that's the only way to do is you're going to have to be able to gel your words so you can explain it to somebody, something that's going on. Now, of course, I'm not trying to sell a book, but when I wrote my book, I wrote the top 16 topics and symptoms I thought that somebody with PTSD would most likely be facing.
mhm,
So that might help you put words to it. There's good information on YouTube. If you have a particular thing, you can put a couple keywords into YouTube and see if you can get information there to help you, gel together your thoughts, your words. And I think that's important. And I think, where therapists are important, I think if you can find a Christian therapist, your best. It's not easy to find one, but
mhm,
your best. Um, you are going to be with yourself a lot of hours of the day. A therapist at best might be 50 minutes a month, maybe 2 set 50-minute sessions, but you're there for 8 hours a day. You're gonna have to manage yourself, and you're going to have to teach yourself. You're gonna have to understand yourself. And so I think writing is the best thing I can offer to anybody, and that
mhm.
writing can be anything.
Right.
You write Bible verses, positive messages, anything you want, um,
Yes.
anything.
I completely completely agree. There are so many people that we've talked about the same exact thing. You could do prayer journals, you can do gratitude journals, like you were talking about being grateful, write down the things that you're grateful for. And that can be really difficult, especially at first. But if you can find one thing, it tends to be able to snowball as you continue. Um, and so I really appreciate it. Can you tell everybody where to find your book?
There's a number of places. So the first one is Kindle Unlimited. It's free and it's free forever. We've decided to make it free of charge. You can buy a paper book and it's $10. The value of the paper book is one of the things I liked was I left blank spaces in the book. It says thoughts where you could write, you read
Yep.
something, you can write into the book. I'm a big believer of writing a book. Well, I underline my Bible, I
I do too.
colorize it, right? But I encourage that. That's the value there. If somebody's reading this, they'd like a free copy for their county library, just reach out to me and we'll get you a free copy, county library. And slowly, if you're in the military, there's a good chance you have access to it for free. Anyhow, the
Mhm.
whole idea is to get this for free,
Okay.
and if a church library wants one, we can send one as well.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, I really appreciate having you
Well,
on
thank
Faith with Taupe, and enjoyed our conversation,
you. I
the
did
wealth of
too.
knowledge, and so glad that you are helping others with, sorry for all the things that had to happen to be there, but like so many other people, I know God is
Great.
using you. So thank you. For those of you out there, thank you for joining us. Continue to be blessed and bless others, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. We would love it if you downloaded this episode, subscribed to the show, and shared away. You never know who might need to hear what has been said today. Thanks for listening.